I wasn't lost. At least nothing suggested that I had gone in the wrong direction. There was no confusion, no wrong turn, no clear moment where I realized I didn't know where I was. The places were familiar. The sequence of the day followed its usual order. The small movements repeated themselves without resistance. From the outside, everything seemed in place. I woke up when I usually did. I went where I was expected to go. I answered when someone spoke to me. Nothing slowed me down. Nothing pulled me off course. And yet, something felt slightly misaligned. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just quietly enough to register. I became aware of it in the way I moved through moments. The second after a decision, the pause before I continued, the stillness between one action and the next. Those moments felt a little wider than before, not uncomfortable, just noticeable. I was still functioning, still moving forward, but I wasn't fully present in the same way. Actions happened smoothly and then passed. Thoughts arrived clearly but didn't settle. Situations felt recognizable, yet slightly removed, as if I was participating from nearby rather than from within. Nothing felt wrong, nothing felt urgent. It was more like a subtle distance from myself, as if I had been walking the same path for a long time, and then, without stopping, I had shifted just enough to notice the space around me. Everything in front of me stayed the same, but the way I moved through it had changed. I paid attention to how normal everything still appeared. I responded when it made sense. I nodded at the right moments. I said the kinds of things people expect you to say. If someone had asked whether I knew where I was going, I would have answered without hesitation, and the answer would have sounded certain. That was the strange part, because inside I could feel a distance, but I couldn't describe it clearly. It wasn't doubt. It wasn't uncertainty. It was a feeling without a clear direction. A quiet awareness that something in me was no longer fully aligned with the moment I was in. I tried to treat it as insignificant. I kept moving, kept following routines, kept letting the day unfold from one moment to the next. But the distance stayed. I noticed it in repetition, the same routes, the same surroundings, the same familiar sequences unfolding again. Everything recognizable, yet slightly less immediate. Not wrong, not empty, just less anchored. As if life was unfolding around me and I was moving through it from a small step back. I didn't fight it. I didn't try to force myself to feel more grounded. I only noticed that I was noticing. And that awareness shifted something. Because once you realize you're not fully there, even by a small margin, the moment can no longer pretend to be complete. Everything continued forward. Time moved on. People spoke. The world kept its structure, and I moved with it, aware that I wasn't lost, but also not entirely present. I noticed it in how I made decisions, not in what I chose, but in how detached the choosing felt. I could decide something and realize afterward that I had done so automatically, like my actions were leading while something deeper stayed quiet. I noticed it when I looked back on my own day. The schedule made sense. The actions were logical. The interactions were familiar, but I felt slightly separated from the experience of it all, not disconnected, just observing, as if I had stepped slightly behind myself and started watching how I moved through things. Even simple choices felt different. Where to focus, what to respond to, how much attention to give. They weren't difficult, they just felt less instinctive. I had to be present to make them instead of letting momentum carry me forward. And that awareness felt new. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a realization. It was quiet. And because it was quiet, it was easy to question, but it kept returning. in the same subtle way, at the same moments, as if it was waiting for me to acknowledge it. I started to notice how often I looked for confirmation that I was fully engaged, a clear sense of direction, a clear sense of purpose, a clear feeling of being exactly where I was meant to be. When it wasn't there, I didn't panic. I just noticed the absence of certainty, and that absence changed how everything felt. Not the actions, not the outcomes, just the way they passed through me and the way I moved through them. I didn't explain it to anyone. There was nothing to explain, but I carried the distance with me, quietly, through the same paths and the same hours, aware that something had shifted without changing my direction. I didn't try to correct it. There was nothing to fix, no wrong step to undo, no clear answer to search for. The feeling didn't demand action. It didn't ask to be resolved. It simply existed alongside everything else. I let the day continue without forcing alignment. I didn't push myself to feel more certain. I didn't try to convince myself that everything was clear. I didn't try to eliminate the distance. I let it remain quietly, like a detail I was allowed to acknowledge. The strange thing was how familiar everything still felt. People spoke the same way. Places looked the same. My routines stayed intact. And yet, the inside of it felt slightly shifted, as if a small part of me had stepped aside and changed how everything was experienced. The distance didn't grow. It didn't disappear either. It stayed subtle, easy to overlook if I chose not to focus on it. And maybe that was the point. Not every misalignment announces itself. Some shifts arrive quietly without asking to be noticed. They don't stop your movement. They don't change your direction. They simply alter how the journey feels from the inside. Nothing around me needed to change. Nothing needed to be corrected or explained to anyone else. I didn't need to define what I was feeling to allow it to exist. I simply continued, aware that something had shifted without needing to understand it fully. I noticed how quickly my mind wanted to frame it, to give it meaning, to turn it into a reason, to make it fit into a story. But the feeling resisted that. It stayed simple. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a conclusion. It was just a state, small enough to live with, real enough to respect. And once I stopped trying to define it, it became easier to carry. Not because I understood it, but because I stopped demanding clarity. I kept moving through the same hours, taking the same steps, with a quiet awareness underneath everything. As if I was learning for the first time that you can keep going without being fully there, and still, the path continues. I wasn't lost, but I wasn't fully there.